Hello everyone, and welcome back to Western Flavors. In our last episode, 2 weeks of agonizing waiting ended when exam results arrived, bringing the answer everything depended on. Ty had passed with overall score of 84%, every section above minimum, demonstrating that months of preparation had been sufficient. But instead of immediate celebration, Ty needed private time to process the profound magnitude of what passing meant. 4 years overcome, identity restored, nightmare ended. Amy's hurt when she discovered he'd kept results secret for 2 hours was valid, but she understood his need for private processing before shared celebration. Family gathering brought explosive joy, and weekend community celebration at nearly complete Heartland barn gave everyone who'd supported Ty's recovery chance to witness official recognition. The episode ended with Ty standing in rising barn as Dr. Borden officially again, surrounded by community that never stopped believing, finally allowing himself to feel pride without fear. If you're enjoying this season, please hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss a chapter. Today, victory reveals its complications as Amy discovers the full extent of what Ty concealed during his darkest recovery moments. Independent practice begins, bringing pride and validation. Construction reaches completion, marking the end of months of rebuilding. But sometimes our greatest triumphs arrive simultaneously with warnings we can no longer ignore. And sometimes the people we love protect us from truths that would have destroyed us, even as carrying those truths alone nearly destroys them. The week following Ty's licensing success brought the beginning of what they'd been working toward for months: independent veterinary practice. While Heartland's barn underwent final completion work, Ty set up temporary office in Hudson using space Scott generously offered. It was modest setup: examination room, small waiting area, basic equipment, but it was his. No supervision, no safety net. Dr. Ty Borden practicing veterinary medicine independently for the first time in over 4 years. His first solo appointment arrived Monday morning, Mrs. Patterson bringing her elderly gelding for assessment. The horse was 28 years old, clearly declining, and Mrs. Patterson needed honest professional opinion about quality of life and end-of-life decisions. It was an emotional case requiring not just clinical judgment but compassion and communication skills that were as much art as science. Ty performed thorough examination, assessed the gelding's physical condition and pain levels, and then had difficult conversation with Mrs. Patterson about realistic expectations and humane options. Amy had come to the temporary office ostensibly to help with setup, but really to witness Ty's first independent case. She watched from the doorway as he worked, hands steady, manner confident, clinical judgment sound. This was the veterinarian she'd fallen in love with years ago. No hesitation. No doubt. Just competent professional doing work he loved and did well. When Mrs. Patterson left with treatment plan and timeline for making future decisions, Ty sat heavily in the examination room chair with expression that combined exhaustion and satisfaction.
That was beautifully handled. You gave her honest assessment without taking away hope. That's the balance good veterinarians achieve.
It felt good. Scary but good. Being solely responsible for clinical decisions, for giving advice that impacts lives. That weight is real. But it's the weight I've been working to carry again.
They closed the temporary office that afternoon with sense of genuine accomplishment. Ty had successfully practiced independently, had made sound clinical judgments, had handled emotional case with compassion. He was genuinely Dr. Borden, again, not just in title but in function. At Heartland, construction had reached 90% completion. The barn stood fully enclosed now, interior work nearly finished. Caleb estimated 1 more week until everything would be complete, the veterinary office equipped and functional, the barn operational, months of rebuilding reaching tangible conclusion. But walking through the nearly complete structure, Amy noticed details that made her chest tight. This was really happening. Heartland was rising from ashes. Ty's career was restored. Their future was unfolding exactly as they'd hoped during the darkest months after loss. Why did success feel so complicated? Wednesday afternoon, Amy was cleaning Ty's study while he was out handling another solo appointment. The room had become disaster zone during months of intensive preparation, papers everywhere, textbooks stacked haphazardly, notes covering every surface. With the exam passed and license restored, it was time to restore order. She was organizing the desk drawer when she found it, a notebook she didn't recognize, tucked beneath veterinary journals and study guides. The cover was plain, black composition notebook that could have been anything. But something about how it was hidden rather than displayed made Amy pull it out. Opening to the first page, she recognized Ty's handwriting immediately. The date at the top was from early in his recovery, those first brutal weeks when he'd been struggling to rebuild anything resembling veterinary competence. "I don't think I can do this. Everyone believes I'll recover, but I know better. 4 years destroyed something essential. I'm not the veterinarian I was before. I'm not sure I'm a veterinarian at all anymore. Maybe I should just disappear. Again would be easier than watching myself fail while everyone watches with disappointment and pity." Amy's hands began shaking as she read. This was journal-detailed documentation of Ty's internal experience during recovery. And the first entry revealed depths of despair she'd never witnessed, pain he'd completely concealed from her. She kept reading, unable to stop, despite growing horror at what she was discovering. Entry after entry documented thoughts Ty had never voiced. Suicidal ideation during those first months when recovery felt impossible, panic attacks he'd hidden by locking himself in bathrooms, failures at practice exams he'd never mentioned, moments when he'd wanted to quit but forced himself to continue only because disappointing family felt worse than continuing to suffer. Failed another practice exam today. Third one this week. Scott's patience is wearing thin. I can see it even though he's kind about it. Amy keeps telling me she believes in me, but I know she's just being supportive. The truth is, I'm not good enough. Never will be again. Should have stayed disappeared. At least then people remembered me as competent veterinarian instead of watching me fail to become one again. Some nights I think about ending it would be cleaner than this slow public failure. But Lindy needs father and Amy's lost enough. So I keep going even though I know I'm just delaying inevitable failure. The words blurred as Amy's eyes filled with tears. Ty had been suicidal, had seriously contemplated ending his life, had been suffering at depths she'd never imagined while projecting determination and hope to everyone around him. She'd thought she knew his struggle, thought she'd been supporting him through difficulty. But she'd had no idea, absolutely no idea, how bad it had actually been, how close he'd come to giving up permanently, how much pain he'd been concealing while pretending to be okay. There were dozens of entries spanning months, documentation of every failure, every moment of despair, every time he'd wanted to quit but forced himself to continue. The journal was chronicle of suffering far deeper than anything he'd shared with her. Amy sat on the floor of Ty's study, notebook in lap, crying as she read page after page of hidden pain. He'd been protecting her, protecting the family, carrying unbearable weight alone, because he judged that sharing it would damage them more than concealing it. But the concealment itself felt like betrayal now. How could he have been suicidal without telling her? How could he have suffered that deeply while she'd been sleeping beside him every night, completely unaware of the darkness he was drowning in? She felt devastated and guilty and furious all simultaneously, devastated that he'd suffered so much, guilty that she hadn't seen it despite being his wife and supposedly his partner, furious that he'd made decision to hide it from her, robbing her of chance to help when he'd needed it most. That evening, Ty returned home from his appointments energized and satisfied. He'd handled 3 cases independently, routine wellness exam, minor laceration requiring sutures, consultation about nutrition management. All successful, all reinforcing that he was genuinely competent to practice without supervision. But walking into Fairfield, he immediately sensed something was wrong. Amy was sitting in the living room with the black notebook on her lap, her face showing she'd been crying. His stomach dropped. He'd forgotten about that journal. Hadn't looked at it in months, hadn't even remembered where he'd hidden it, and now Amy had found it. Had read it, knew everything he'd kept hidden during those darkest months.
Amy, I can explain.
Were you suicidal? During your recovery, were you actually contemplating ending your life?
Her voice was quiet but carried edge that made clear how deeply hurt she was. Ty sat slowly, knowing this conversation was going to be painful but necessary.
Yes. During the first months especially, when every practice exam ended in failure and recovery felt impossible.
And you didn't tell me? You were thinking about suicide and you kept that from me?
I was protecting you. You were drowning in your own grief. Jack's death, Tim's death, Heartland burning. You were barely holding yourself together. Adding my suicidal thoughts to your burden would have destroyed you.
That wasn't your decision to make. I'm your wife, your partner. You don't get to decide what's too much for me to handle. You don't get to carry suicidal thoughts alone because you've judged that sharing them would hurt me.
The anger in her voice was cutting, but Ty understood it. She was right. He'd made decision about their partnership, unilaterally choosing to protect her by hiding his worst struggles rather than trusting her with the full truth.
You're right. I should have told you. But Amy, you have to understand. I was watching you suffer with your own grief and trauma. Adding my darkness to yours felt cruel. Felt like I'd be drowning you deliberately when you were already barely keeping your head above water.
So you carried it alone instead. Let yourself think about suicide without anyone knowing. What if you'd actually done it? What if I'd woken up one morning and found you dead because you decided I was too fragile to handle knowing you were struggling?
The hypothetical hit hard because it wasn't entirely unrealistic. There had been nights when ending everything had felt almost appealing, cleaner than continuing to fail publicly, easier than disappointing everyone who believed in him. He hadn't done it, but the temptation had been real.
I wouldn't have done it. The thought crossed my mind during worst moments, but I wouldn't have actually followed through. You and Lindy needed me. That kept me going even when I wanted to quit.
But I didn't know that. I didn't know you were struggling at that level. I thought you were just frustrated and anxious about recovery. I had no idea you were contemplating suicide.
She held up the journal, her hands shaking.
There are dozens of entries in here about wanting to disappear, wanting to end it, feeling like burden on the family. Ty, this is serious psychological crisis, and you hid it completely. Made me think everything was difficult but manageable when you were actually drowning.
They sat in painful silence, both processing the revelation. Ty had concealed depths of his struggle to protect Amy. Amy felt betrayed by the concealment even while understanding his reasoning. Both of them were right, and both were hurt. Finally, Ty spoke with voice thick with emotion.
I'm sorry. I thought I was protecting you. Thought shielding you from my darkest thoughts was loving thing to do. But your right partnership means sharing the darkness, not hiding it. I was wrong to keep this from you.
Were there other things you hid? Other struggles you went through alone?
Some panic attacks I dealt with privately. Practice exams I failed that I never mentioned. Nights when the anxiety was so bad I couldn't breathe, and I locked myself in the bathroom, so you wouldn't hear.
Each admission was another small betrayal, another piece of their partnership that Ty had unilaterally decided to handle alone. Amy absorbed them with expression that showed how much the discoveries hurt.
I hid things too. My own struggles during your recovery. I protected you from how hard Phoenix's training was, from how overwhelmed I felt managing everything, from my own grief spiral that I dealt with privately because I thought adding it to your burden would be cruel.
The admission hung between them, both of them guilty of the same crime, both trying to protect each other by hiding struggles, both operating from love but in ways that ultimately damaged the partnership they thought they were preserving.
We were both wrong. Protecting each other from darkness isn't actually partnership. It's parallel isolation.
So what do we do now? How do we rebuild from this?
The following days brought difficult but necessary processing. Amy couldn't simply accept Ty's explanation and move on. The betrayal felt too profound, the hidden pain too extensive. She needed time to absorb what she'd learned and figure out how to trust again when trust had been damaged. She talked with Lisa, sharing the discovery and her complicated feelings about it. Jack kept similar journals during difficult periods. I found them after he died, detailed accounts of struggles he'd never shared with me. Financial stress when the ranch was failing. Health problems he'd concealed. Moments when he'd wanted to quit, but kept going for family's sake. Lisa poured them both tea, her movements slow and thoughtful. I felt betrayed too when I found them, angry that he'd carried so much alone. But I eventually understood that protecting family was Jack's pattern. He genuinely believed shielding us from his worst struggles was loving thing to do. He was wrong. Partnership requires honesty, not protection. But his motivation came from love.
Ty said basically the same thing, that he was protecting me because I was already struggling so much.
And were you struggling more than you let him see? The question cut to truth Amy hadn't fully articulated. She had been hiding her own struggles during Ty's recovery, concealing how hard Phoenix's training was, masking her grief about Jack and Tim, pretending strength she didn't feel because she judged that showing weakness would damage Ty's recovery.
I was drowning, But I didn't tell him because he was already barely surviving his own recovery. So I hid how bad things were for me.
So both of you were protecting each other, both hiding struggles, both operating alone despite being married. That's not sustainable, and it's not real partnership. The wisdom was clear, but the path forward remained uncertain. How did they rebuild partnership after discovering they'd both been concealing significant struggles? How did they learn to share darkness when instinct was to protect each other from it? That weekend brought Heartland Barn's official completion. Construction crew finished final details Friday afternoon, the veterinary office fully equipped, the barn operational, every system tested and functional. Months of rebuilding had reached tangible conclusion. Saturday, family and community gathered for celebration that felt both joyful and bittersweet. The barn stood strong and complete, risen from ashes through patient, consistent work. Ty's veterinary office occupied the space where Marion's training area used to be, equipped with examination equipment, pharmaceutical supplies, surgical tools. Standing in the completed structure, Amy felt emotion overwhelming her. This was what they'd been working toward. Physical representation of recovery and rebuilding, proof that devastation could be overcome through patient effort. Caleb made toast that captured what everyone was feeling.
This barn, burned to ground 8 months ago, stood as pile of ashes and broken dreams. But Jack always said Heartland wasn't about buildings, it was about people refusing to quit when quitting would be easier. This barn stands because this family refused to quit. Because you chose rebuilding over accepting loss. Heartland's back. Not exactly same as before, but strong and functional, and ready for whatever comes next.
The celebration continued with tours of the new structure, admiration of details that had been carefully planned, joy at seeing vision become reality. Ty's office received particular attention. This was where he'd practice, where he'd rebuild professional life stolen by 4 years of absence. But as afternoon progressed, something shifted. People began noticing smoke on northern horizon, thin gray line against otherwise clear sky. News on someone's phone confirmed what the smoke suggested. Wildfire had been spotted north of Hudson, approximately 40 miles away in drought-stressed forest. The celebration continued, but with undercurrent of tension that hadn't been present earlier. Everyone knew what smoke meant. Fire season should have been over by now. November typically brought moisture and cold that eliminated danger, but the drought had changed everything. Conditions remained tinder dry despite calendars saying otherwise. Weather forecast showed no rain predicted for next 2 weeks. High temperatures, low humidity, wind that would spread any flames quickly once they gained momentum. The fire currently burning was relatively small lightning strike that had ignited drought-stressed timber, but small fires grew fast under these conditions. By evening, as people began leaving, the smoke had thickened visibly. No longer thin line but distinct plumes suggesting the fire was spreading despite containment efforts. Amy and Ty stood at Heartland's entrance after everyone had left, looking at their completed barn while smoke darkened the northern horizon.
We rebuilt everything. The barn, your career, our lives. And now there's fire coming.
Fires 40 miles away, may not reach Hudson at all, might be contained before spreading further.
But neither of them truly believed that. The drought conditions were too severe. The winds were too strong. The fire danger ratings had been extreme for weeks. This was exactly what meteorologists had been warning about: wildfire season extending far beyond normal parameters because climate patterns had shifted in ways that made traditional seasonal boundaries meaningless. Inside the completed barn, Ty's veterinary office held everything he needed for independent practice. Examination table, pharmaceutical refrigerator, surgical instruments. All of it ready for the professional life he'd finally reclaimed after months of brutal rebuilding. But outside, smoke continued rising on northern horizon, crisis approaching while they celebrated triumph. Danger arriving while they stood in completed barn that represented everything they'd worked to restore.
We should prepare, just in case. Make sure we have evacuation plan if fire spreads toward Hudson.
We just finished rebuilding. We can't lose it again. I can't survive losing Heartland twice.
But even as she said it, Amy knew survival wasn't choice. If fire came, they'd evacuate. They'd survive. They'd rebuild again if necessary. Because that's what Bartlett's did. They continued after devastation instead of surrendering to it. The barn stood complete behind them. Ty's license hung framed in his office. 4 years of nightmare had been overcome, professional identity had been restored. Everything they'd worked for was finally achieved. And smoke rose ominous on northern horizon, promising that their hardest challenges might still be ahead despite everything they'd already survived. That concludes today's episode of Heartland. Independent practice began as Ty handled his first solo cases with confidence and compassion, demonstrating that he was genuinely Dr. Borden again in function, not just title, but Amy's discovery of Ty's hidden journal revealed depths of despair. She'd never witnessed suicidal thoughts during early recovery, panic attacks concealed deliberately, failures never mentioned, suffering carried alone, because Ty had judged that sharing it would destroy his already struggling family. Her confrontation brought painful honesty about partnership requiring shared darkness, not protective concealment, and they both acknowledged guilt for hiding struggles from each other while thinking they were being loving. Lisa's wisdom about Jack's similar pattern helped contextualize Ty's choices without excusing them, and both Amy and Ty committed to complete honesty going forward. Weekend brought Heartland Barn's official completion, months of rebuilding, reaching tangible conclusion with structure standing strong and Ty's office equipped and ready. But celebration was cut short by smoke appearing on northern horizon as wildfire ignited 40 miles north in drought-stressed forest. The episode ended with completed barn representing everything they'd rebuilt while smoke darkened the sky, climate warnings no longer abstract as danger approached Hudson, despite being November when fire season should have long since ended. Join us next time when wildfire danger escalates as winds shift and flames spread toward Hudson, when evacuation orders force impossible decisions about what to save and what to abandon, when the barn they just finished rebuilding faces threat of burning again, and when Ty's newly restored practice must operate under crisis conditions that test his recovered skills in ways exam never anticipated. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe. Until next time, this is Western Flavors.